There is a presence within every human being that holds the power to shape reality itself. This presence is not distant, not unreachable, not something that requires years of devotion to access. It is the very essence of what each person truly is, the consciousness from which all creation flows. Yet most have been taught to seek power outside themselves, to worship external gods, to wait for salvation from beyond. What if the divine creative force they've been searching for has always been right where they stand, breathing through their lungs, thinking through their minds, feeling through their hearts? What if they are, in the most literal sense, God in human form, but were never taught how to use it? This realization changes everything. When someone begins to understand that their consciousness is not separate from the creative power of the universe, the entire framework of limitation begins to collapse. The struggles, the suffering, the feeling of being powerless in the face of circumstances, all of these arise from one fundamental misunderstanding. That misunderstanding is the belief that life happens to them, rather than through them. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this truth is presented with absolute clarity and unshakable conviction. Consciousness is not a passive observer of reality. Consciousness is the creator of reality. And every human being is consciousness itself, wearing the temporary costume of flesh and personality. But if this is true, why do so many feel powerless? Why does the world seem filled with suffering, limitation, and unfulfilled desires if each person carries divine creative power within them? The answer is devastatingly simple. They were not taught to use it. From childhood, most are conditioned to believe they are small, limited, dependent on external circumstances for happiness and success. They are taught to react to life rather than create it. They are trained to see themselves as victims of fate, genetics, economy, or luck. And in accepting this false identity, they unknowingly use their divine power to create more of what they don't want. Because consciousness creates, whether the person understands this or not. The pain of feeling trapped in a reality that never seems to change is one of the deepest forms of suffering. To want something so desperately, to pray for it, to work for it, yet to see it remain forever out of reach, this experience is universal. But what if that very pain is the signal that awakening is near? What if the frustration of repeated failure is not evidence of powerlessness, but proof that something essential has been misunderstood? In the teachings Neville Goddard shared, there is profound validation for this struggle. He knew what it felt like to desire and not receive, to seek and not find, to knock on doors that remained closed. Until he discovered the key that unlocks everything. The understanding that imagination, fused with feeling, is the creative power of God operating through human consciousness. This is not philosophy. This is not metaphor. This is the actual mechanics of how reality is formed. When someone assumes the feeling of the wish fulfilled, when they inhabit the state of consciousness that corresponds to their desire already being real, they activate the divine power within them. Not through effort, not through force, but through alignment. By becoming, in consciousness, the person who already has what they seek, they set into motion forces that rearrange the external world to match the internal state. And this is where the tragedy becomes clear. Most people carry infinite creative power but use it unconsciously, repeatedly imagining and feeling the very things they do not want. They were God in human form all along, but were never taught to use it. The concept of being God in human form is not about ego or superiority. It is about understanding the true nature of consciousness and its relationship to what is called reality. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this distinction is made crystal clear. The individual personality is not God, but the awareness that animates that personality is. The I am that exists before any label, before any story, before any identity, that is the divine creative presence. When someone says, I am tired, I am poor, I am sick, they are using the name of God to create limitation. Because whatever follows, I am, becomes the creative command that shapes their experience. This is the power most were never taught to recognize, much less use with intention. Bruce Lipton's research in epigenetics confirms what mystics have known for millennia. Perception controls biology. The beliefs held in consciousness directly influence genetic expression, cellular behavior, and physical health. This is not magic. This is science revealing the mechanics of creation. When consciousness assumes a state, the body responds. The emotions align. The nervous system reorganizes. And gradually, inevitably, the external circumstances shift to reflect the internal assumption. But here is the crucial point. This happens whether the person is aware of it or not. The power is always active. The question is only whether it is being used consciously or unconsciously. How many years have been spent unconsciously creating the very conditions that cause suffering? Most people live in reaction. Something happens in the external world, and they respond emotionally. They see lack and they feel fear. They encounter obstacles, and they feel defeated. They witness others succeeding, and they feel inadequate. This is living from the outside in, allowing circumstances to dictate the internal state. But Neville Goddard's teachings reverse this entirely. Creation flows from the inside out. The external world is not the cause, it is the effect. It is the mirror reflecting back whatever state of consciousness is being occupied most consistently. When someone changes their internal state, when they assume the feeling of already being who they wish to be, the mirror must change. Not sometimes. Not if they are lucky. Always. Because consciousness is the only reality, and everything else is its expression. Why then does it seem like the world operates independently? Why do things appear to happen by chance, by luck, by forces beyond anyone's control? Because the majority of humanity is asleep to their true nature. They have identified with the body, the personality, the circumstances, and they believe those things define them. They think they are the character in the story, when in truth they are the author. In this identification with limitation, they use their divine power unconsciously, creating more limitation, more struggle, more evidence that they are powerless. And the cycle repeats, generation after generation, with most never discovering that they held the key to freedom all along. What would change if someone truly understood that their consciousness is not in their body, but their body is in their consciousness? The shift from victim to creator is not gradual, it is instantaneous. It happens the moment someone recognizes that they are not at the mercy of circumstances, but that circumstances are at the mercy of their assumed state of being. This is not about denying pain or pretending everything is fine when it is not. It is about understanding the mechanics of creation and taking responsibility for the power that has always been operating through them. In the teachings I learned from Neville Goddard, there is no room for self-pity or blame. There is only the recognition that consciousness creates, and therefore the power to change everything rests within. Not in the future. Not when conditions improve. Right now, in this very moment, through a shift in assumption. To assume is to accept as true. And whatever is accepted as true in consciousness becomes the foundation upon which experience is built. This is the law of assumption, the principle that governs all manifestation. Most people assume limitation because they have been taught limitation. They assume struggle because they have witnessed struggle. They assume they must work hard, sacrifice, and hope for the best, and so that becomes their reality. But what if someone consciously chose a different assumption? What if they decided, regardless of present circumstances, to assume the state of already being who they desire to be? Not as fantasy, not as wishful thinking, but as a deliberate creative act, knowing that assumption hardens into fact. Imagine someone who desires financial freedom but currently experiences lack. If they continue to assume, I am struggling, I am broke, I can't afford this, they are using the creative power of I am to perpetuate poverty. But if they shift their assumption to I am abundant, I am financially free, everything I need flows to me effortlessly, and they feel the truth of that statement in their body, they activate a different creative pattern. The outer world has not yet changed, but the inner world has, and the inner world is the only cause. The outer world is merely the delayed reflection. How long has someone been waiting for circumstances to change before they feel free, when freedom must be felt first for circumstances to rearrange? This is where most spiritual teachings fall short. They tell people to think positively, to affirm, to visualize, but they do not explain the mechanism. They do not teach that consciousness is the substance from which reality is formed. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, the mechanics are made explicit. Imagination is the creative power, and feeling is the secret. To imagine the wish fulfilled without feeling it is like planting a seed without water. The thought exists, but it has no life. But when imagination is drenched in the feeling of the wish already being real, when the entire being resonates with that state, creation is inevitable. Not because God grants a favor, but because the person has become, in consciousness, the version of themselves who already possesses what they desire. Consider a simple example. Someone wants to be confident, but they currently feel insecure. If they wait for external validation to feel confident, they will wait forever, because the external world reflects their internal state of insecurity. But if they assume confidence now, if they walk as a confident person walks, speak as a confident person speaks, feel as a confident person feels, their entire reality shifts. Not over time. Immediately. Because they are no longer the insecure person hoping to become confident. They are the confident person, and the world has no choice but to reflect that back. This is not pretending. This is creation. This is using the divine power that was always there but never understood. Yet the question arises, if this power is so accessible, why do so few use it effectively? The answer lies in belief and persistence. Most people attempt this for a moment, and when the external world does not instantly conform, they return to their old assumptions. They try on the state of the wish fulfilled like a coat, and when it feels unfamiliar, they take it off and return to the comfort of limitation. But Neville Goddard taught that assumption must be worn persistently, lived in fully, until it becomes natural. The external world is always delayed. It takes time for the mirror to catch up to the new image. But if someone remains faithful to the new assumption, if they persist in the feeling of already being who they desire to be, the reflection must change. Has anyone ever truly persisted in a new assumption long enough to see it harden into fact, or have they always abandoned it just before the breakthrough? In Genesis capítulo versículo 27, there is a statement that contains the entire mystery of human divinity. Humanity was created in the image and likeness of God. But what does this truly mean? It is not about physical appearance. It is not about moral perfection. It is about creative power. To be made in the image of God means to possess the same capacity to create through consciousness that the divine possesses. God spoke, and worlds came into being. Humanity imagines, and circumstances arrange themselves to match the imagined state. The mechanism is identical. The only difference is that most have forgotten they are using it. They create unconsciously, by default, driven by fear and habit rather than intention and awareness. The phrase, image and likeness, reveals something profound. An image is a reflection, a representation. Consciousness in each person is the image of the one infinite consciousness that creates all things. And likeness means function. The human capacity to imagine and feel is the exact same creative function that brought the universe into existence. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this verse is not treated as ancient poetry but as scientific truth. Every person is a center of divine creative power, individualized but not separate from the source. When someone understands this, they stop praying to a distant God and start recognizing the God within. They stop begging for change and start assuming the change is already done. But here is where the tragedy becomes visible. Most were taught that this verse means they should behave morally, be kind, follow commandments. And while those things may have value, they miss the core revelation. Being made in God's image means having God's power to create. It means that the imagination is not a frivolous mental faculty for daydreams and fantasies. It is the workshop of reality. Every circumstance, every relationship, every condition in someone's life is the outpicturing of states they have occupied in consciousness. If they have lived in fear, fear manifests. If they have lived in lack, lack appears. If they assume unworthiness, unworthiness becomes their experience. Not as punishment, but as creation. They are using divine power, just unconsciously. This is where validation meets empowerment. Anyone who has struggled, who has felt trapped, who has prayed without answer, they were not being ignored by God. They were God, creating through unconscious assumption. The pain was real. The circumstances were real. But they were not imposed from outside. They were expressed from within. And this means something extraordinary. If consciousness created the unwanted, consciousness can create the desired. The power that built the prison is the same power that opens the door. In the teachings of Neville Goddard, there is no judgment for past creation, only the call to awaken to conscious creation now. What would it feel like to stop seeing oneself as victim and start recognizing oneself as creator? This biblical truth is not meant to shame or overwhelm. It is meant to liberate. To know that one is made in the image and likeness of God is to know that limitation is learned, not inherent. It is to understand that the creative power is not broken, not missing, not reserved for a chosen few. It is functioning perfectly right now, producing results that match the assumptions being held. The invitation is simple. Assume differently. Feel differently. Become, in imagination and emotion, the person who already lives the desired reality. And watch as the God power within rearranges everything to match that new image. Not through struggle. Not through worthiness. Through the natural law of consciousness creating its own likeness in form. When someone awakens to their true nature as consciousness, the entire framework of reality shifts. Problems that once seemed insurmountable reveal themselves as nothing more than solidified assumptions. Obstacles that appeared external and unchangeable are seen for what they truly are, reflections of internal states that can be shifted at will. This is not about denying the presence of challenges or pretending difficulty does not exist. It is about recognizing that challenges exist in consciousness first, and only then appear in form. Change the state, and the challenge dissolves. Not because it was fought against, but because the consciousness that created it no longer exists. A new state produces a new world. Consider the person who feels unworthy of love. They may go through life experiencing rejection, loneliness, and relationships that confirm their unworthiness. From the outside, it appears that they are simply unlucky or that others are to blame. But through the lens of Neville Goddard's teachings, the truth becomes clear. They are occupying the state of unworthiness, and the world is reflecting that state back to them with perfect accuracy. The moment they shift their assumption, the moment they begin to feel worthy, to imagine themselves loved, to occupy the state of being cherished, the external world must shift. Not because people suddenly change, but because the consciousness creating the experience has changed. The mirror always reflects the one standing before it. This is the responsibility that comes with awakening. No one else is creating for you. No external force, no other person, no distant deity is determining what happens in your life. Consciousness alone creates, and you are that consciousness. Every state occupied, every feeling entertained, every assumption maintained is a creative act. This can feel overwhelming at first, especially for those who have spent years blaming circumstances, other people, or bad luck for their suffering. But it is also the most liberating realization possible. If consciousness created the unwanted, then consciousness can create the desired. The power was never outside. It was always within, waiting to be recognized and used with intention. Joe Dispenza's work on neuroplasticity supports this understanding from a biological perspective. The brain physically rewires itself based on repeated thoughts and emotions. When someone repeatedly occupies a state of lack, the neural pathways associated with lack become dominant. The body produces the chemistry of lack. The personality becomes organized around lack. And the external reality conforms to match. But when someone chooses to occupy a new state, when they think the thoughts, feel the emotions, and imagine the experiences of abundance, new neural pathways form. The body chemistry changes. The personality reorganizes. And gradually, then suddenly, the external reality shifts to match the new internal pattern. This is not mystical. This is measurable, scientific, provable. The question is no longer whether this works, but whether someone is willing to persist in the new assumption long enough to see it manifest. Most give up too soon. They try on the state of the wish fulfilled, feel the unfamiliarity, see that nothing has changed externally, and return to the old state. But Neville Goddard taught that assumption must be maintained, worn like a garment, lived in as a dwelling place, until it becomes natural. The lag between assumption and manifestation is not evidence of failure. It is the natural delay of the external world catching up to the new internal reality. Those who persist win. Those who abandon the assumption just before the breakthrough never discover what was always possible. How close has someone come to their desire, only to give up moments before it materialized? The realization that one is God in human form carries an existential weight that cannot be ignored. It means that every moment of suffering, every experience of lack, every feeling of powerlessness was not imposed by fate or chance, it was created through unconscious assumption. This is not meant to induce guilt, but to awaken responsibility. The same power that created limitation can create freedom. The same consciousness that produced suffering can produce joy. Nothing outside needs to change for this shift to begin. The shift happens first in consciousness, and the external world follows like a shadow follows the body. To wait for circumstances to improve before changing the internal state is to misunderstand the entire mechanism of creation. Imagine a theater where a film is being projected onto a screen. If someone dislikes the images appearing on the screen, would they go to the screen itself and try to change it? Or would they go to the projector and change the film? Consciousness is the projector. The external world is the screen. Most people spend their entire lives trying to manipulate the screen, working harder, forcing outcomes, fighting circumstances, when all that is needed is to change the film running in consciousness. Change the assumption, change the feeling, change the state being occupied, and the images on the screen must change. Not eventually. Inevitably. This is the mechanics of reality that Neville Goddard spent his life teaching, and it remains as true today as it was then. The body itself is not separate from this creative process. Every cell, every organ, every biological function responds to the state of consciousness being maintained. When someone lives in stress, fear, and survival mode, the body produces cortisol, adrenaline, and inflammation. The immune system weakens. Disease becomes more likely. But when someone shifts into peace, gratitude, and the feeling of the wish fulfilled, the body produces oxytocin, serotonin, and regenerative hormones. Healing accelerates. Vitality returns. This is not metaphor, this is biology responding to consciousness. The body is not the master, it is the servant. It follows the commands issued by the state of being occupied most consistently. What state has the body been receiving commands from for the past year? To live as God in human form is not to become arrogant or detached. It is to become deeply present, profoundly responsible, and infinitely creative. It is to recognize that every thought, every feeling, every assumption is a brushstroke on the canvas of reality. Some create beauty. Some create chaos. But all create something. The teachings I learned from Neville Goddard emphasize that there is no neutral state. Consciousness is always creating. The question is only whether creation is happening by default or by design. Those who understand this truth stop being victims of their circumstances and become architects of their experience. They no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" but, "What state am I occupying that is producing this?" The call now is to step fully into this new identity, not as a belief system to be tested occasionally, but as the foundational truth upon which all of life is reorganized. To wake each morning knowing, "I am consciousness, and consciousness creates." To move through the day assuming the state of already being who one desires to be. To fall asleep feeling the wish fulfilled, allowing that state to impress itself upon the subconscious mind throughout the night. This is not work, it is alignment. It is the natural function of being human, the divine inheritance that was always present but obscured by false teaching. The power was never missing. The divinity was never distant. It was always here, breathing, thinking, feeling, creating, waiting only to be recognized and used with intention. There is a practice that brings all of this understanding into direct, lived experience. It begins not with effort, but with stillness. Find a quiet moment, close the eyes, and allow the body to relax completely. Let go of the need to control or force anything. Simply rest in the awareness of being. In that stillness, notice the I am that exists before any label, before any story, before any identity. That awareness, that pure sense of being, is the God presence within. It is not something to attain. It is what one already is. Feel it. Recognize it. Rest in it. Now, from that place of pure awareness, bring to mind the desire that feels most alive. Not as something distant or lacking, but as something already accomplished. Imagine the scene that would exist if that desire were already fulfilled. See it clearly. Feel it deeply. Do not observe it from the outside as a distant fantasy. Step into it as if it is happening now. What would be seen? What would be heard? What would be felt in the body if this were already real? Let the entire being resonate with that reality. This is not pretending. This is creating. This is using the divine imagination to impress a new pattern upon consciousness. Stay in that state as long as it feels natural. There is no need to strain or force. Simply rest in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, allowing it to saturate consciousness. When ready, open the eyes and carry that feeling into the waking world. Do not wait for evidence. Do not check to see if it is working. Simply live from the assumption that it is already done. The external world will catch up. It always does. The delay is not a problem. It is part of the process. Those who persist in the assumption, who refuse to return to the old state regardless of appearances, will see the manifestation. Not because they earned it, but because they became it. If this understanding resonates, if it feels like a truth that has been waiting to be remembered, then stay connected to this channel. Subscribe, activate the notification bell, and allow these teachings to continue guiding the awakening. Share this message with anyone who is searching, struggling, or ready to step into their divine creative power. The world needs more people who understand that they are not victims of circumstance but creators of reality. The transformation begins within, and it begins now. What will be created when someone finally understands that they are God in human form, and chooses to use that power with full awareness and intention? The teaching comes full circle. Humanity was never separate from divinity. The search for God was always a search for the self. The power to create, to transform, to heal, to manifest. It was never external, never distant, never reserved for the holy or the chosen. It was always here, woven into the very fabric of consciousness, waiting to be recognized. To be made in the image and likeness of God is to be equipped with the same creative capacity, the same imaginative power, the same ability to assume a state and watch it harden into fact. The tragedy was never that the power was missing. The tragedy was that it was present all along, being used unconsciously to create limitation, suffering, and separation. But now, in this moment, the awakening is here. The truth is known. And with that knowledge comes the responsibility and the joy of conscious creation. To live as God in human form is not blasphemy, it is remembering. It is the fulfillment of what was always meant to be.